Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Sergi Roncucci, and on behalf of the European Parliament Intergroup on Climate Change, Biodiversity and Sustainable Development, I'm delighted to welcome you all to today's webinar, focusing on further improving farming sustainability by integrated pest management, highlighting the challenges and the opportunities ahead. Before we kick off, I would like to take the opportunity to thank hosting MEPs of today's event, Mr. Norbert, Ms. Ulrike Müller, and Ms. Sarah Wiener, as well as our colleagues from Copa Cogeca for kindly organizing this webinar. Moreover, I would like to take the opportunity also to thank Mr. Mark Dinterington for accepting to moderate today's event. Prior to passing the floor to the hosting MEPs for their opening remarks, I would just like to provide some housekeeping rules, specifically inviting our audience to send us your question during the event. For that, you can use the Q&A box, which is situated on the right side of your screen, choosing the All Panelists option. Within your question, please make sure to also mention the speaker to whom your question is best addressed, so that we can facilitate a fruitful discussion to follow. Once again, thank you all for joining us today, and Mark, you have the floor.
Well, thank you, Regina, and good afternoon to all of you. For those that don't know me, my name is Mark Titterington. I'm with the Forum for the Future of Agriculture. I spent most of my career in and around agriculture and food, both in the public and the private sector. And so when I say it's a great pleasure to be moderating today's event, I truly mean it. And the subject is fascinating as always, and the discussion seems more than timely. EU agriculture is facing increasing demands for sustainable food, feed, fuel and fibres. Farmers across the European Union have been asked to produce more, often with less, efficiently manage natural resources, facing new disease and pest pressure, often born through the emerging challenges that we have from a changing climate. And alongside that, of course, we have a policy framework which is evolving rapidly as a consequence of the Green Deal ambition, the strategies for farm to fork, biodiversity, and of course, an emerging new common agriculture policy. And of course, underneath all of that, it seems clear too that almost wherever you go in the Union, consumers and citizens are taking on an increasing interest in how their food is produced, where it comes from, and agriculture more generally. So I think we have a really fascinating afternoon ahead of us as we discuss some of these challenges, but also the multiplicity of opportunities that exist in this area. And we have indeed, as you will have seen from the agenda, a fabulous lineup of speakers and contributors. And there's really no better place, I think, to start to set the scene really for this afternoon's discussion than with our co-hosts of this event. They are, of course, the vice chairs of the European Parliament's Intergroup on Climate Change, Biodiversity and Sustainable Development. In a few moments, we'll hear from Ulrike Müller and Sarah Wiener, both members of the Agriculture and Rural Development Committee. But first, to lead us off, the chair of that committee, my great pleasure as always to introduce Norbert Linz to you. Norbert, you have the floor.
Yes, thank you very much to Mark Titterington, dear colleagues, dear Ulrike Müller, dear Sarah Wiener, dear ladies and gentlemen. Further improving farming sustainability is the title of today's event. Let me begin by telling you why I like today's title so much. It is because it's already acknowledged that our EU agriculture is the most sustainable one in the world. I can't remember how many times I have been emphasizing that agriculture is part of the solution for more climate and environmental protection and not the problem. And today we want to discuss how we can improve the sector and how we can help our farmers to become even more sustainable. Whether and how to use plant protection products has become the Gretchenfrage in the European pesticides bubble. I believe that instead of asking the Gretchenfrage, we should focus on these two crucial questions. First, how do we continue to ensure that the food that is on our tables in Europe is safe for consumers? Secondly, how do we ensure that our European farmers can also produce this food in the long term. In my opinion, we should all agree on the following principle when it comes to the use of plant protection products: as much as necessary, as little as possible. And this is why integrated pest management is the key tool for reducing pesticides use while still giving farmers the necessary toolbox. This is why it is not the solution to try to ban substances through MRL objections in the parliament. Please excuse my direct words on this, but with unscientific decisions like this, the majority of the parliament acts in reality as a wolf in sheep's clothing, pretending to make good decisions for the citizens, but in the end, taking away the possibility for sustainable integrated pest management, especially for special crops, like for example hop growers. Less and less substances are available, making sustainable choices like integrated pest management, and in the long run, if this continues, sustainable agriculture in Europe impossible. Ladies and gentlemen, I think we can all agree that we want to keep agriculture in Europe and we want to help farmers to a sustainable transition. So let's talk about necessary toolboxes and solutions. In my opinion, we need three things. First, all decisions should be science-based. Whether or not to allow substances on the market should be based on scientific evidence and evaluation. We have a strong scientific body in EFSA and we must trust their evaluation. Second, innovation is key for more sustainability. New, more efficient products and digitization are the key to more sustainable use. And this must be supported by a smooth approval process and innovation. I welcome in this regard also the Commission's study and communication on new breeding techniques. Green Deal and Farm to Fork will only see the light of the day if the targets are supported by innovation. This has to be our priority in my view. So I will leave it with this and I'm looking forward to the discussion. Thank you very much. I give the floor back to Mark.
Norbert, thank you very much indeed. A strong message on innovation there. Ulrike, I wonder if we can bring you in and hear your thoughts on this. Of course, as I said, member of the Agriculture and Rural Development Committee, but in the previous mandate of the Parliament, I know you were also on the Special Committee on EU Authorisation Procedure of Pesticides. So no doubt you have a background and an experience and an expertise to share with us. Ulrike, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure for me to speak here with, in your panel. Hello, Norbert. I can fully agree with your remarks at the beginning, dear Sarah. Dear speakers, dear participants, welcome as from my side to this event on the future of integrated pest management. There is no farming without crop protection. Farmers need to protect their crops so that they can assure a stable supply of food and commodities, and so that they can make a living by farming. Farmers also need to protect crops from pathogens that are a threat to human health, such as mycotoxins. This fact is often forgotten, and I look forward to hearing from Billy Wirtz from the Consumer Choice Center about this during the meeting. During the last years, public and political attention has shifted strongly to environmental and climate change challenges. We know that we have to reduce negative environmental side effects of crop protection. At the same time, farmers are amongst those hardest hit by the consequences of climate change, droughts, more frequent extreme weather events, a new pests and diseases are challenging plant health. This is high up on the political agenda. With the eco schemes of the new CAP, we will make an important step forward in integrating this in our agriculture policy. Together with my colleague Sarah Wiener, we currently negotiate the Parliament's response to the Farm to Fork strategy. This strategy outlines the path to a more sustainable European food system. Part of the Commission's vision of the strategy is a substantial reduction in increased use on farm level. All this a huge challenge for farmers. We have to acknowledge that. It is essential that we don't just burden farmers with additional requirements. We need to ensure that they are equipped with the right tools to meet these demands as well. During the previous mandate, we had a close look at the European pesticides approval system in the PEST and in the ENVI committees. What we have seen is that we are still not fast enough in making safer and effective alternatives to current plant protection products available. But integrated pest management is not just about pesticides. We also must look into speeding up innovation in biological pest control. We must utilize technology that helps farmers apply plant protection measures more targeted. And finally, we need access to new varieties that are less dependent on inputs and that are fit to meet the challenges of climate change. On this last point, I believe we have received a very positive signal from the Commission last week. I thank all the speakers of their participation and now look forward to hearing from them on these topics. Thank you so much.
Ulrike, thank you so much indeed. I think you framed the challenge there of how we meet these competing demands that are being put on farmers and growers, and I know we'll hear from Pedro Gallardo a little bit later on that. But thank you very much for that contribution. Sarah Wiener, if we could turn to you now. Of course, as I said earlier, another member of the Agriculture and Rural Development Committee, but also founder and leader of the Sarah Wiener Foundation. I know that you're personally very committed to promoting healthy eating habits, food quality, and of course, organic farming. And so I'm very much looking forward to hearing your input on this important subject. The floor is yours, Sarah.
Thank you so much. I can't see myself, but I hope you can see me. Dear participants, dear Ulrike, dear Norbert, I'm very happy that I can speak today, say a few words, and I have to mention that I'm not convinced and I'm not in the same direction as Norbert and Ulrike are. First of all, I want to mention we wouldn't have this discussion if everything in our agriculture, in the industrial agriculture, would be so fine. We know we have a lot of crises and we have to tackle them. We have also crises about resources. So we know that our soil is sick. It has a burnout. And it's also because of huge amounts of pesticides. We have a water problem. We have a biodiversity problem. We have a plant problem. Also the plants we have now in our environment are also tired. So we have to find new solutions. And I want to say very clear, it's not about a party. It's not about left and right. It's about our whole future. We are in one boat, in one ship, and we have to tackle those problems together. So I think we have really to live and think more sustainable. And I have to mention that, of course, reducing pesticides to doing less from the worst, less from things who are harming the nature is better than more from pesticides and more harm, but it's not the best solution. The best solution is to do more from the good. And there is an agriculture who don't need any pesticides, who shows that it goes very, very well without pesticides, without fertilizer. And those are the organic farming. I, as an organic farmer, can assure you it works, and it works very good. And it's also very good for the future, for our weather problems who will come. So I think, I'm convinced that our agriculture has to be sustainable and regional, decentral. So there are a lot of alternatives agriculture systems we are not speaking about, like micro farming, agroforest cultures, permaculture. So it's not for everyone in every place, but it could help to tackle a lot of those problems who we are talking about. Let's say something about IPM. I think this would be a good way for transition. And I welcome that in the Farm to Fork strategy, as Ulrike mentioned, we want to reduce, we have to reduce the pesticides for 50%. But to say the truth, if you look, as we can see in South Tyrol, where there's a process about IPM agriculture, that they say that they do it still since many, many years. And now we have the evidence about the pesticides books, and we see there is no any difference about normal pesticides agriculture and IPM. So we have also to tackle this problem that we really have to make more scientific and more help for teaching the farmers how to do it well. And it would have another benefit, because you don't have to pay so much money, and you don't have to pay to the huge monopolists. The small-scale farmer will have their own income from their work, and to be their sorry for my bad English, they would be the kings of their land. And you know that it isn't like today. Today, you don't get money from the agriculture. You get money because you for the input for the agriculture. So the farmers have not a good position with that, and the pesticide industry is one of the problems of this. So if we, I'm pretty sure I'm maybe alone in this Zoom conference about this, but please, let's stay open and let's thinking bigger and future for the whole world, because of course it exists still sustainable farming. It's not that we have the best system, because if we would have the best system, we wouldn't have this huge amount of problems now that we want to tackle, and also in the Farm to Fork.
Sarah, thanks so much indeed for that very rich and passionate articulation of some of the challenges, but also where you see some of the opportunities as well. And what we do hope in this discussion this afternoon, that we will be open-minded and constructively challenge each other to try and find the right path forward. Sarah, I think we might have the opportunity to hear from you towards the end of the meeting if you're able to come back. I know that both Norbert Linz and Ulrike Müller have to leave us now, but I want to thank all three of you for contextualizing the discussion this afternoon. Very much appreciated. And as I say, hope to hear from you a little bit later on, Sarah. Thank you. Well, our attention now turns to our two keynote addresses for today's event. One could argue that they have their fingers on the pulses of the policy framework which enables some of this to happen. Shortly, we'll hear from Pierre Bascu, who of course is from DG Agri in the European Commission, which I'm sure needs no introduction. Equally so, our first keynote speaker this afternoon is Andrew Owen Griffiths, and he is, of course, head of unit for plants and organics at DG Sante in the European Commission. Andrew, it's my pleasure to welcome you here, and the floor is yours.
Thank you ever so much for the introduction. I hope everyone can hear me okay. We did a test, so I'm presuming you can hear me okay. Thank you also to the introductory steps from the members and the sponsoring members. I've looked at the agenda, and I must say I'm quite looking forward to the discussion. A very broad range of well-known and wise presenters presenting a variety of views and a variety of different aspects on this important issue of IPM. So I'm looking forward to an interesting exchange. I should introduce myself that I'm working for DG Sante in the European Commission. And I'm in the unit, the directorate responsible for the Sustainable Use Directive. And by default, therefore, for the review of the Sustainable Use Directive, an action which is ongoing at the moment and is one of the actions announced in the Farm to Fork strategy. So obviously IPM is one of the cornerstones of this piece of legislation, the Sustainable Use Directive, and that's what we're focusing on today. So let's start off with IPM. I mean, the first thing to say is I hear it talked about as something new in many fields, and it isn't. So it's been in the legislation in Europe since 2009, but it has a history way before that enshrinement in legislation in Europe. It's internationally recognized by international organizations like the UN. It's used in most countries around the world, and we've got similar models of application of IPM in many of our large trading partners. So we're not working in isolation here within Europe. And even preceding the legislation in 2009, many of the principles of IPM, such as the idea of a threshold of pests that needs intervention, this idea of a hierarchy of controls, have been around for a long time, and indeed way back in the 60s and 70s, and have been incorporated in organic farming as well. So nothing particularly new. The Sustainable Use Directive, as I say, has been around since 2009, but more recently, in the framework of the Farm to Fork strategy, it's become one of the most looked at pieces of legislation, I think, in Europe. So it's been the subject of 2 reports to Council and Parliament, which have been produced by the Commission and extensively discussed, one in 2017, one in 2020. 2 sets of Council conclusion, 1 parliamentary report, a European Court of Auditors report, and around 18 audits or inspections carried out in member states to see how they're applying the legislation at ground level, which literally involves going to the farm, going down to the user level and seeing how it's working. So I ought to say we know a lot about the Sustainable Use Directive, and we know a lot about IPM at ground level, much more than we would in many other areas of legislation. So what does all that analysis show us? Well, it shows us that IPM is widely used. All member states incorporate and promote IPM. We have seen very numerous examples of good practice. However, these tend to be very specific to regions or to areas or to specific crops. So we can see good examples, but they're not necessarily spread throughout the whole country, the whole region. We find the negative side is that if we were to ask member states what the level of IPM implementation is in whatever member state it is, member states can't tell us. They either say we don't know, or they say, oh, 100% because it's a legal requirement. And this is one of the difficulties then. If we want to see IPM becoming more widely used, more systemic, we need to have a system whereby it can be checked by competent authorities and they can make a decision that yes, IPM has been adequately applied or not. And here lies in this change that is needed, this change in mentality from something that is promoted and is a good idea to something that is required and you have to apply at user level. The difficulty is it's very difficult to assess. If we look at the principles of IPM as listed in Annex 3 to the legislation, there's lots of decisions to be made. We start off with this idea of prevention or suppression. So before we have an intervention, we try to stop the pest from becoming a problem. And here, there's all sorts of possible interventions: crop rotation, physical methods, resistant cultivars, and what those mean in the context of a specific crop is very difficult to define. Even if we take one of them, crop rotation, it doesn't necessarily mean if a crop is rotated that it's going to inhibit the pest. It has to be rotated with another not related crop. It has to be a certain cycle, and this needs defining. And if we're trying to make a decision that IPM is or isn't being defined, the farmer needs to know which practices they should and shouldn't be applying. And therefore, a competent authority in assessing a farm needs to know that as well. So that's where we are. That's the current situation that we have from our analysis of IPM at farm level. Looking forward then, so the context, we've already heard mention numerous times of the Green Deal and the Farm to Fork strategy announced in May 2020, which strives for a transition to a more sustainable agriculture, but also looks throughout the food chain. It's not just about agriculture, it's about processing, it's about distribution, it's about consumption. So it's the whole chain of food, not just about the farmer. And as part of that strategy, we have a very ambitious target to reduce by 50% the use and risk of chemical pesticides by 2030. And here, I think we need to bear this in mind constantly, because this is, okay, it's an aspirational target, it's not legally binding, but it very much sets the ambition as to where we want to be and where we want not only the Commission to be, but everybody, the industry, the Parliament, everybody here to be on board to reach this target. I think we've all discussed the need for some reduction. Now, this target, it will not be reached by maintaining the status quo. There needs to be changes to reach this target. And we acknowledge and we strive that improved IPM application at farm level is one of the necessary steps, along with many others, that will be needed to reach this target. So we need to look at how we are going to assist farmers, but also ensure that IPM is applied more systemically. As part of the Farm to Fork, we're already reviewing the Sustainable Use Directive. We propose a new legislative proposal presented by the Commission in the first quarter of 2022. We're currently very advanced with that evaluation. We have had extensive meetings with member states, with stakeholders, including many of them here today. And we're currently fairly advanced in developing the policy options that will be subject to impact assessment. In the area of IPM, I think it's fair to say we haven't had any appetite from anybody to revisit IPM and the principles of IPM. So we think that the principles, as I say, they're universally recognised, are fairly safe and don't need amending. What we do need to look at is this issue of improved implementation and how we go about improving implementation. And here, one of the things we look at is developing crop-specific guidance at member state level, which would mean that the member state has to translate the principles of IPM specifically to that crop. So I've already mentioned this crop rotation, for example. If crop rotation is necessary, it would define which crop rotation should be used for that crop if you're going to say that you're applying IPM. Of course, if we're going to be asking such decisions to be made, we do need what we call an increased toolbox. We need more alternatives. We can't get away just by saying we remove this pesticide, we remove this pesticide, and we remove that pesticide. If we're removing a pesticide, we have to have an alternative, and the principle should be, as far as possible, those alternatives should follow this IPM hierarchy. We should look for alternatives that are non-chemical to start off with, like resistant varieties, changes in agricultural practices, changing in crop rotation. We should then look at non-chemical methods and wherever we can, biological controls, low-risk substances to replace the chemicals which are currently used very often by default. And then we have support to the farmer to enable them to make these decisions that we hope will be assessed. And we think member states know the problems in the member state. It's very different across member state to member state, but a member state knows which chemicals it's being used. It knows which crops it's growing, and it knows where the problems are. And the research and the toolbox needs to be focused at member state level to the particular problems in that member state. I think the final thing I would like to say is there's also a lot going on in the discussions with member states in the review of the CAP and the national strategic plans. And this process, which is ongoing, obviously, provides numerous opportunities to support some of the measures that I've mentioned in the previous steps. In particular, to promote IPM beyond the minimum legal requirement. So when we can say, okay, we're going beyond what is legally required, there may be an economic disbenefit in doing that, then the various schemes can come in to try and support those measures. I understand my colleague from DG Agri is about to follow on, and I hope that he'll explain a little bit more about the role of national strategic plans and the CAP in his intervention. So I probably spoke too quickly, I always do, but I'm aware of the time. I hope that's a good introduction to the topic. Thank you.
Andrew, thank you very much. Really clear articulation of where you see things. I wonder if I might just throw two quick follow-up questions at you, and I'll just be a little bit provocative. IPM principles generally accepted and understood. If I put you on the spot in the European context, in terms of its implementation, is this still niche? Is it becoming mainstream, or has it become mainstream and just needs to be better implemented? And then a follow-on question to that would be, how are we doing in terms of mobilizing all actors to make the contribution to make an IPM as successful as it can be?
Okay, thank you, Mark. Interesting questions. I think when we started looking at IPM, we had workshops with member states back in 2017, 2016. Most of the examples that were brought forward were very much for, well, not niche crops, but for specific crops, for greenhouse production, for fruit and vegetables, for orchards. There were very little interventions from member states on what you might say is large-scale agriculture, particularly arable crops. But more recently, it's fair to say that we've specifically looked with member states at examples for large-scale arable production, and it is coming on mainstream. It is becoming more widespread, and the member states are dealing with what is a more difficult topic to deal with than, for example, interventions in a greenhouse are a lot easier. You've got a contained environment. You've got a regulated environment. You can take measures much easier. So maybe we're not completely balanced yet, but we are moving, and we have seen from the industry and from member states a move towards IPM in all sectors of agriculture, and that's a real positive that I think that we can take forward from what we've seen with members. The other question, I mean, about all actors, yes, I mean, I think one of the things we have to say is that this is a divisive topic. It's we've already heard from the interventions that people have different views, but we're not going to get where we want to be by exploring divisions. We have to explore commonalities and the way we work together. And I have to say that we've had positive impacts, positive contributions to our evaluation from all sectors, including the organic sector, the pesticide industry, and I think it's a real positive that all the sectors seem to have. Nobody really has spoken out against the target and the ambition we've set. I mean, how it can be achieved and whether it can be achieved is a different matter, but everybody is on board with this ambition, and I think that's another big success and something that we're very, very happy about.
Great, thank you, Andrew, for that, particularly for that upbeat message at the end there, and thanks for taking on those two questions. Well, we'll turn now to Pierre Bascu, of course, is Director for Sustainability and Income Support at DG Agriculture. I guess, Pierre, that leaves you very well positioned to take on this particular topic, and we certainly look forward to hearing what you have to say. Pierre, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mark. Can you hear me?
Yep, very well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. First of all, I would like to thank you and the organizers of the intergroup from the European Parliament, I think, for their invitation to talk about the integrated pest management, which is an issue, as you said, I think earlier in your intervention, which is very topical. In the previous intervention from my colleague Andrew Owen Griffith from DG Santé, we had a presentation of the aspects, I think, of the integrated pest management, which were mainly related to the pesticide legislation and target, and in particular, related to the sustainable use of pesticide directive. And I would like, I think, in my intervention, to focus a bit more as a complement, I think, to the aspects, I think, of IPM, which are, more directly linked to the common agricultural policy, and which are more linked, I think, to the implementation. And because it is our view that in the farming sector, these two legislation act in synergy towards a common goal. So in my intervention, I will first recall, I think, the context. I think you have already addressed it to some extent. I will then provide, I think, an overview about how the CAP can help, and then I will focus on the specific instruments which are very relevant for our topic today, for the integrated pest management. So let's start by the context. I think it is now widely accepted that farming, as it was done in the past, has achieved a lot, but I think at the same time, farming has raised in its practices a number of environmental problems, and in particular in relation to the intensive use of pesticide. And I would like to underline the word intensive use of pesticide. And it's clear that the use of pesticide doesn't help ensuring food security, and this is what we were looking for. We shouldn't forget in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. But clearly now, this intensive use of pesticide has led us to some kind of dead ends, in particular in relation to its impact on biodiversity. So now the concept of sustainable farming has gradually found its way, and is now the approach we are all looking for. And for pesticide use in farming, it means ensuring a transition, because I think this has already started, and Mr. Lins, I think, has recalled that, but a transition between an approach where pesticides were used as a routine towards an approach where pesticide will be used only as a last resort. And for us, I think this is very much, I think, the rationale, I think, underlying the concept of integrated pest management. So this concept has been translated in legislative terms in the Sustainable Use Directive, and Andrew has presented very clearly in terms of logic of implementation, in terms of definition of the concept, but also in terms of state of play in implementation in the member states, with a rather uneven implementation across member states. Now we have changed over the last, I would say, 2 or 3 years. I think the policy and I would say the political context has radically changed. This commission has now decided with the Green Deal to acknowledge as the first priority that the EU must complete the transition to a more sustainable economy. And for farming, it means significant changes. It means that we need to produce more with less, and we need to produce better. And these changes are reflected in the Farm to Fork strategy, which sets in terms of illustration for this long-term vision and this long-term ambition, which set, I think, a number of targets for organic farming, for biodiversity area, for antimicrobial resistance, etc., and for pesticide. And the EU must mobilize itself to reduce this use of pesticide by 50% by 2030. And it is important to recall, I think, this level of ambition, because IPM, the Integrated Pest Management, will be one, I think, of the driver, one of the key elements in support, I think, for this ambition. So how can the Common Agricultural Policy can help? How can the CAP help? We should recall that basically, I think the CAP reflects, I think, one ambition and some key policy objectives, and it is supported by a set of instruments and a significant budget. And as you know, this significant budget of the CAP allows to influence farmers' practices throughout, I think, the EU. Just, I think, as a reminder, 90% or around 90% of farmers receive direct payment, and these 90% of farmers are therefore bound, I think, by the condition to receive these payments. And some of the conditions will have a direct bearing on the use of pesticide. I think the instruments includes both a set of compulsory practices, which are known now as cross compliance, in the future, as a conditionality, and which are practices, basically, which are standard practices that all farmers need to respect if they are, to receive, I think, the public support, but for which I think they will not be remunerated. And beyond these mandatory practices, I think the set of instruments include also what we call voluntary instruments, support schemes, financial incentives, in order to basically incentivize farmers to implement practices that go beyond, I think, this mandatory element. And I will come back, I think, on certain of them, later on. I would like to underline that in order to improve, I think, the governance of the current CAP, which is rather centralized and lacks, I think, of flexibility, the Commission has proposed for the future CAP to put a greater focus on performance rather than on compliance. And for this, I think we have proposed, I think, to introduce more leeway that will be left, I think, to the member states in the design of the policy, and in order to adapt the instruments, I think, to the specific needs, and in order to facilitate, I think, the ability of member states to address specific challenges, such as, I think, the dependency of farmers, I think, on pesticide use. And I think the Commission has called, I think, this new governance system, I think, the new delivery model, but it is clear that under this new model, member states will be able to design the policy using the CAP instrument that will be best to deliver, I think, on the specific targets. And this design, I think, will be explained in the CAP strategic plan that each member state, I think, will have to prepare and to propose to the Commission, and the Commission, I think, will have to approve them. It is an element which is very important because this is through this element that member states, I think, will be able to adapt as much as possible the budget, the specific instruments, and the practice that they want, I think, to promote or to impose to some extent, I think, to farmers in the future. And the use of pesticide will be an important element of these plans. The plans will have to reflect, I think, the Farm to Fork strategy. Andrew has mentioned that I think these targets and this ambition represent aspirational targets and a long-term vision. They are not legally binding, but it is clear that in the strategic plan, for the future strategic plan, we will have them to reflect the ambition of the Farm to Fork strategy and be based on the assessment of the current situation that will accompany and that will underpin, I think, the reliability and the relevance, I think, of this plan. And to guide member states, in particular, in translating these targets, and in particular, the target related to pesticide, the Commission has already issued a set of recommendations, and all the recommendations which have been addressed to the member states include a section on the use of pesticide, and they all recommend the promotion of the use of integrated pest management through the CAP and for the farming community in the future. So now let's focus, I think, on the relevant CAP instruments. Many instruments are relevant for promoting the sustainable use of pesticide in the farming sector and in all sectors. And I could mention, for instance, I think the market measures that all include environmental program promoting the IPM, in particular in the fruit and vegetable sector. But I would like, I think, to focus now, I think, on the selection of the most important instruments. Conditionality, which is not an instrument, but which is a mechanism, eco schemes, management commitment, and advice. And Mrs. Wiener has underlined this. Advice and the role of advisory service, I think, will be absolutely essential in the future. I will start with the conditionality. The future conditionality will cover, like now, the pesticide regulation, including the condition for proper use of pesticide, as this is set on the labels, also by doses, crops, periods, etc. This means that if a farmer does not comply with this condition, a reduction of CAP payment, I think, may be applied, I think, to this farmer. And I think, and the level of reduction, I think, will depend on the intention, etc., etc. But what is new in the future for the future conditionality is that the Sustainable Use Directive will now be introduced in the scope of this conditionality, and this will include, in particular, the precautions to take to get rid of used pesticide packaging, or the precaution to take, for instance, in the use of pesticide in what we call sensitive areas related to the Water Framework Directive, Natura 2000, etc. And on this basis, member states will be able to develop support schemes to reward, to remunerate practices that go beyond, I think, this standard practice. And this can be done either through the eco scheme in the first pillar, or through management, and or I would say, because I think member states can do both, management commitment in the second pillar. And in particular, in relation to the sustainable use of pesticide, member states will have to take full account of their implementation of a sustainable use directive of the suite in order to design, I think, the future green architecture targeted at pesticide use. This means that member states, when they will design, I think, the strategic plan, they will have to start from the national action plan, which are defined, I think, for the implementation of the SUD directive, and to develop, I think, these CAP instruments to accompany the implementation of the national action plan. So concretely, I would like to provide, I think, some examples about how this could look like. Concretely, member states must require the implementation at farm level, and this is very important, at farm level of the 8 general principles set in the Sustainable Use Directive, through in particular crop and sector-specific guidelines. Andrew has mentioned that. I think this will be, with the National Action Plan, this NAP and these crop or sector-specific guidelines will be very much, I think, the foundation of what can be done and what can be introduced in the strategic plan, I think, for the farmers. And the compulsory practices must be reflected in the scope of conditionality, either through these SMR, what we call SMR, that means the statutory management requirements, or through this kind of standard practices, what we call, I think, the GAIC. And for instance, as regard compulsory practices, a compulsory rotation, Andrew has already mentioned that, the compulsory rotation defined for implementing, I think, the IPM principle 1 of the SUD must be reflected in the definition of the member states of what will be the future, the GAIC standard number 9. Member states also will have to define what they mean by biodiversity area in the definition of GAIC standard number 9, just number 8, sorry, for rotation, number 9 for biodiversity. A lot of other standards also related to the maintenance of permanent grasslands, related to the management of buffer strips, etc., will have to be designed also as compulsory practices under the IPM general principle number 1. But what is important is that under this implementation as mandatory standard of this general principle number 1, member states will have the flexibility, the leeway sufficient to adapt this principle to the reality on the ground, to the sector, to the crop, I think, which have been grown, I think, by farmers. As regards the voluntary practices, beyond, I think, these mandatory practices, examples of what could be supported financially through these strategic plans with the future CAP. I could mention, I think, some elaborated crop rotation, for instance, I think with shorter period, a more diverse, selection of crops. I could also mention the possibility for member states, I think, to support land-laying fallow, which are managed, I think, specifically for biodiversity purpose. I could also mention mechanical, weed control that could be supported, I think, in the future through the CAP, or the use of pest-resistant crop varieties. So member states, I think, will have the possibility to either support them through the eco scheme and or through the second pillar, through this management commitment. To help the member states in this process and in order to clarify the situation, the Commission has conducted a study with a contractor, and we aim, I think, at providing the result of this study within the next few months. And the aim of this study is to have a review of the IPM, practices and to share them through a database so that I think member states can really draw from, I would say, the best practice and what currently exists and work on the ground in order to design, I think, facilitate the design of a strategic plan for the future CAP. One element that I would like also to mention before concluding is the need, I think, for technical support and advice. We consider that this is absolutely essential, I think, for promoting, I think, the use and implementation of the IPM, I think, to the farming community. In this context, a significant budget, I think, for research is foreseen under the Horizon Europe, but more importantly, maybe, is that knowledge transfer is absolutely fundamental. It needs, I think, to be supported in order to make this transition happen, or this transition being supported. And for that, the future CAP foresees that member states will develop what we call the AKIS, the Agricultural Knowledge and Innovation System, and put advice, I think, at the core of it. And farmers can have access, I think, to advice, I think, on the IPM. Member states can also, use the second pillar of the CAP in order to finance, I think, the development of this access to these advisory services. They can use it also, I think, to basically finance, I think, the training of the advisors, and they can also finance, I think, the development of this advisory system. So a lot of possibility, I think, in the CAP to support, I think, this advisory role, which is, in our view, I think, a necessary, ecosystem service, I would say, to really, I think, promote, I think, a change, I think, in farmers' practices. So just to conclude, I would like to underline that the future CAP and its new ambition, I think, with the Green Deal and the Farm to Fork strategy, represent, in our view, a real opportunity to to achieve this transition towards full sustainability, towards resilience, and towards competitiveness. And this, I think, thanks to the strategic approach, thanks to this mix, I think, this combination of mandatory element and financial incentive, and also thanks, I think, to the significant budget, but also the specific focus which have been put in the future CAP, I think, to the stronger role of research, innovation, and the provision of advisory services. And for this, in particular, in relation to the necessity to reduce the dependency of farmers, I think, on pesticide use, the IPM is seen, I think, as really, I think, a game changer, and one element that can really facilitate, I think, the transition, I think, of the farming sector towards full sustainability, and in order to achieve the reduction, I think, the expected reduction in pesticide use by 50% by 2020. Thank you very much.
Pierre, thank you so much indeed. As always, when I listen to you speak, I end up with just a plethora of questions in my mind, which of course we don't have time to ask them all, but maybe just one that you touched on at the end is top of my mind. When we talk about research and innovation, are we doing enough? Is Horizon Europe doing enough in this space to stimulate both public and private research and innovation that can drive forward IPM, but sustainability more generally?
Well, I will be a bit blunt with you. I think we never do enough in terms of research and innovation. And this is why the Commission has proposed and will implement a very significant increase, I think, in research and innovation in the field of agriculture, food, and rural area. But it's clear that I think in this very ambitious, objective, I think, of transforming the farm sector, and I would say, I think, completion, I think, of the transformation of the farm sector, because I would like to support very much Mr. Linz when he mentioned that I think the farm sector in the EU, I think, is one of the most, the most sustainable farm sector, but we still need to do more, and I think much more. But I think in order to support, I think, this transition, it will be absolutely key to continue providing, research and innovation and a lot of new techniques, and to make the most, I think, of the new technologies, satellite, artificial intelligence, etc., to make it at the disposal, I think, of farmers, but also to promote, I think, the use of the output, I think, of this research and innovation, because research and innovation is nice, but I think if we don't reach the farming community, if we don't reach, I think, the advisors, this will be, I think, really suboptimal. So we need to have, I think, the two elements, research and innovation, and at the same time, promoting a strong, I would say, ecosystem, that can really accompany the farmers and make, I think, the best use of those three elements, I think, for the farming community. So this is, in our view, I think, a kind of synergy that needs to be developed, I think, in the future to really, because we talk about pesticide, we can talk about, reducing also the use of fertilizers. We can talk about, improving the biodiversity performance of farming. We can talk about, reducing the antimicrobial use, etc. So there's a lot of challenges facing agriculture. And of course, I think the key challenge is climate change, because this climate change will have also a very significant impact, I think, on the level of, on the degree of exposure of the farm sector to pest infestation, etc., etc. So a lot of challenges, a lot of role for research and innovation, but I would say a lot of very positive development for the farm sector, and the CEP is there to facilitate, I think, this transformation.
That's great. Well, thank you very much indeed, Pierre. If audience members don't have questions themselves, I may well be back to you a little bit later on. But thank you very much indeed for that perspective. Now, just a reminder to participants to today's event, if you do have questions for the panelists, please do put them into the chat function and in the Q&A box that you'll see down there in the bottom right-hand corner of your screen, and we'll do our very best to curate those and put them to the relevant speakers. Well, we've heard from the Commission, we've heard from the members of the European Parliament. We're now going to switch gears and go to Pedro Gallardo, somebody that I follow religiously sometimes on the social media, to hear the farmer's perspective. Pedro, of course, is Vice President of COPA. A lot of demands being put on you as farmers, both to produce, but also to do that in the most sustainable way possible. It will be great to hear your perspective on that, also taking account of things you've already heard. Pedro, welcome. The floor is yours.
Thank you, Mark. Thank you very much. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you also to Intergroup on Climate Change for the invitation of this event. I have a presentation I'm going to start to share. Okay, it's now, well, my name is Pedro Gallardo. As you say, Mark, I came from Spain. I'm a farmer in Andalusia, in the south. I'm also president of Cádiz, Asaja, and I'm also vice president in Asaja at national level, and also vice president of COPA. I produce durum wheat in my farm, sunflowers, protein crops because the rotation, and at the end of this presentation, I will show you some photos. Okay, let's start. First, I would like to talk about something about a little bit about Copa Cogeca. Copa was created in 1958. We represent 23 million European farmers, more than 60 farmers association. 1 year later, Cogeca was created. We represented 22,000 cooperatives and 35 members associated, cooperative associated. We have a general secretary created in 1962. Okay, the role of the agricultural sector in the farm work on the Green Deal objectives. First of all, we have to remember that our agricultural and food industry make the European one of the world leading producing of food and warranty food security, providing millions of jobs in Europe. Also, European farmers are also #1 of the custodian of the environment, as we take care of natural resources of 48% of the European land. Last December, the Commission published the communication on the European Green Deal, where, among others, pesticide use in agriculture is taken in the framework and on the farm to fork strategy. The Commission have the intention to reduce the overall use of risk chemical pesticide by 50%, and the use of more hazardous pesticide by 50% by 2030, and 20% of reduction at least of the use of fertilizer. And the Commission communication on the European Green Deal approach has several axes that they are very much linked to agricultural sector. This approach is opportunity, but it's also a challenge and raises various concerns. Current challenge. Nowadays, the European agriculture is facing a number of the other challenges. We have insurance, food security, and the increasing demand for food, feed, and non-food outlet production. We have to remember, under the climate change pressure, that this is very important. Feeding the world, taking into account the complex interaction between agronomic, environmental, and economic values. Producing food in the future with even fewer natural resources, while facing new pests and diseases because of the climate change effects, reducing greenhouse gases emission, maintaining the same amount of productivity on the same land. No, because we have reduced the land in Europe. We'll check later at our land. And achieving the customer's demand with increasing requirements with respect to the production itself and requirements on how it's to produce it. That is only another important. Well, the farmer's view on crop rotation, the main principles, we have all, of course, the safeguarding plans on crop health. That is, by principle, is a cornerstone of all farming activities and modern arable farming in European Union. Of course, as part of our job, like farmers, we have to recruit the plant protection product, the PPS, to grow healthy crops on competitive terms and ensure that the consumer demand are met at the same time, because it's also important. Day after day, the farmers are in a very competitive market, which involves providing safe food, feed, and non-food agricultural products. So, also the appropriate use of PPS is important tool. Of course, we have to try to maximizing our yields in our farm, and of course, the presence in the market of the plant protection tool can make a huge economic difference for farmers. We must also remember that the current context of the global trade allows other countries to have tools currently and which are not available at the European. And this question creates an enable playing field for the competitive in our farming business. Our farmers' view on crop protection, IPM. Okay, IPM allows farmers to avoid unnecessary use of chemical pesticide, and they are moving towards low-risk substances and select crop protection techniques. Availability in the use of IPM's tool is a key for sustainable agricultural production in European Union. IPM combines various agricultural practices to reduce the impact of agriculture on the environmental, like crop rotation, which was said before by Andrew, for example, and implementation of resistant cultivars, soil management, and seed protection. IPM also considers the use of chemical in the last resort of agriculture, and chemical PPE will remain an essential element in IPM, although their share will continue to decrease towards the future. And besides the PPS, we support the high quality and agricultural production. Our farmers' toolbox, we need alternatives. We said many times that farmers need adequate tool to better manage in agricultural resources, to deliver food, goods and services to consumers. Of course, we have to adapt our farming to the climate change and respond to the social demands. The way to reduce the chemical and fertilizer, when there is no mention of a list of the credible and realistic alternatives in the Green Deal, should be clarified and ready, because we don't know. And new alternatives to conventional PPS would allow for increase in quantity and quality of agricultural output, while using fewer but more precise inputs. Alternatives must be resourced as much as possible for a European Union crop protection industry in order to treat our crops when it is necessary, and be able to provide high value and food and quality food, for example, in horticultural products with European Union origins. To achieve this, we believe that clear, transparent, and cheap procedures for the evaluation of new active substances that and plant protection techniques should always be warranted. Of course, the interest of European farmers is to apply low-risk PPS and other sustainable technologies. Proper ability, such as products, is still far from envisaged. About the farmers' toolbox, innovation is a crucial piece. For Copa Cogeca, innovation is essential for the European agricultural sector to remain competitive in a global market. We have to remember what we are in a global market. But the first issue to tackle this identifying farmers' specific needs is one to order to bridge the gap between the science and the practice. We must insist on research into the development of this alternative of the application through the IPM exchange based on existing scientists literature and the wealth of knowledge collected by European Commission research programs. So this specific research program must be financed by European Union institutions, and they should take into account the differences in crop production and climate regions around the European Union. Besides, we must too encourage the exchange information between stakeholders within the food chain through the thematic networks and other digital platforms, and knowledge about innovation in the field agriculture must flow directly and adequately, not only from research to the farmer, also in the to the way around. And farmers toolbox also is a solid science-based basis for plant protection tools. As started the next legislative proposals in the framework of the Green Deal and Farm to Fork should be based on a solid science-based risk analysis paradigms and precautory principle. And farmers must give available, safe, effective, and affordable tools sourced as much as possible from the European Union crop protection industry in order to treat our crops when it is necessary to be able to provide high value and quality food and horticultural products. And of course, in the about the farmers toolbox, investment cost is affordable. We have to keep in mind that all alternatives may come from agricultural market, must be affordable for the farmers. We want to insist that the fact on the farmer that and also agri cooperatives are already investing and applying innovation solution to keep our business in competitive, sustainable. On the other hand, cost a long time to register new substances and increase significantly in the last year, while many substances haven't been reauthorized, so we have lost. Okay, I'm going to move food for thought. The Farm to Fork strategy must consider all the three pillars: the economic, the social, and the environmental, before taking any political or regulatory decision about the EU agriculture. A logistical impact assessment should be performed before establish the targets to reduce the use of conventional PPS while not having enough alternative at the hand. A safe, effective, and affordable toolbox is guaranteed. Avoid the future reducing of yields and ensure the food security, and maintain the production while taking increasing effect on the climate change and other like we have now with the COVID-19. Last but not the least, is fundamental that the policy formulation and implementation support the agricultural economic sustainability, improve the function on the market, and contribution to more economically, environmentally, and socially sustainable agri-food sector. Recognize it that there are already numerous of production methods which bring additional benefits to sustainable. This is my farm. I would like to share before to finish. This is one more example of farming. We have farmers like me. We say now we have open gates to check what we are doing in our farming, because we have many differences with other generations. I live in the countryside. My closest neighbor is 2 kilometers far. My closest city is 6 kilometers far. And children is important part of the solution. They will bring sustainable food for the future because we have to continue keeping the business. And of course, in my farm, my children is important, and they are everywhere in every communication because it's fundamental. Population is to finish. Population is increasing, is growing, and Europe has to be solidarity with this. For example, with Africa. Africa is going to grow. United Nations said that Africa is going to move from 1,300 million people to 4,500 million people. And we have to feed Africa. We cannot only look at our belly button because we have enough food in Europe. We have to make solidarity with Africa. And agriculture, like Norbert said, is part of the solution. And of course, we have to defend organic, conventional, and biotechnological agriculture because all this system could be sustainable. And please, last question, put the farmers in the center of the debate, please. Thank you very much, Mark.
Pedro, thanks so much indeed, and what a clear message at the end to put the farmer at the center of everything that we do, whether it's policy or innovation, or indeed the way that we look at this as consumers. I really appreciate that. Again, I've got numerous questions, but I'm also cognizant of time, which is moving on. I hope you'll stay with us, Pedro. We'll try and get back to you in Q&A, but I'm going to move us on now, if that's okay. Thank you again. Great to see you as always. I'm going to bring us into the panel discussion now, and thank you also for those people that put their questions in the chat function. We'll try and get to as many of those as possible, and if we don't, I'm sure speakers will be happy to follow up afterwards. Well, our panel discussion this afternoon contains four very distinguished speakers. We'll hear from Jennifer Lewis from the IBMA, Bill Wirtz from Consumer Choice Centre, and Laurent Auger from CropLife Europe. But to kick us off, Berenice Dupont from the European Environmental Bureau is a senior policy officer for agriculture at the EEB, hugely respected institution, of course. She holds a PhD in agriculture economics and also postdoctoral research on the relationship between farming and the environment. So, Berenice, I suspect you are well positioned as anybody to tell us how we unlock this challenge of IPM and sustainability in farming, and indeed what the EEB can do about it. Berenice, the floor is yours.
So thanks, Mark. Good afternoon, everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the organizer for inviting me to this event this afternoon. So, what is common knowledge that intensive practices, including pesticide use, are responsible for dramatic loss of biodiversity. The impact of pesticide on pollution is less well known today. So I just want to remember some facts that have not been mentioned yet. So regarding soil, for instance, the European Environment Agency actually have look at soil samples, and the results shows that over 80% of the soil tasted contains pesticide residues, and 58% of them actually contain a mixture of pesticide residues. So about 160 type of possible cocktail effect have been found. So clearly, accumulative effect of pollutant and cocktail effect of pesticide residue in soils are the rules rather than the exception. If we look at water, for instance, in the case of the Netherlands, 1/3 of the groundwater abstraction, we can find pesticide concentration that exceeds the 35% of pesticide standards. So clearly, we need to keep this fact in our mind in our current discussion. So having pesticides is absolutely feasible for current knowledge and technologies, reducing by the first 50% of pesticide use is a low-hanging fruit. So we know, and has been mentioned by DG Sante earlier, is that actually integrated pest management is not something new, and it should be mandatory since 2014. However, there is a clear lack of political will. Member states are not acting, and the European Commission is not enforcing this directive. For instance, the European Commission should challenge member states and asks them to provide in their national action plan quantitative targets, a clear timetable to achieve those targets, and demonstrate the effectiveness of the measures they have chosen to achieve these targets. Only then the European Commission will be within the capacity to assess the collective EU effort to achieve the EU Green Deal ambitions. While the National Action Plan includes some measures on the promotion of integrated pest management, such as encouraging availability of integrated pest management guidelines, the provision of training, they do not specify how the application of the IPM by farmer can be measured, nor do they set targets and the challenge of member states in hitting those numbers. The provision of the SUD directive are there, but there is a clear lack of implementation. Some member states are already financially supporting farmers in moving toward integrated pest management under the CAP. And like it has been mentioned, it is expected that more member states will do so in their future national CAP plan. Therefore, it's critical that member states holistic measure with synergies with other environmental dimensions such as water, climate, soil, and that they promote agroecological practice that actually deliver systematic change rather than technofix solution. Agroecological practices, systematic change have long-standing impact on all environmental dimensions and will increase the resilience of the farmer himself facing climate change, for instance, or other economic disruption, like we have seen with the COVID. So those measures should be sufficiently attractive for farmers, meaning the payment per hectare should be attractive to them, and ensure that they are properly monitored to allow feedback mechanism and to adjust them over time. One of the big fears now is that we see that IPM, basically the lower pyramid, the first principle, are rather good agronomic practices. And one of the fears is that most of the taxpayer money will go actually to practices that are linked to chemical use. While it should be the reversed. It should go to good agronomic practices first. But having reduction targets for pesticide and effective measure to promote IPM is not enough. Given the significance and the controversy around pesticide, the current lack of reliable public data need to be urgently addressed by the European Commission. Currently, we only have sales record quantity, and that doesn't really reflect what's happening on the field. So first, we should record and monitor quantity of pesticide use. However, total weight of pesticide or weight per hectare is not enough. This doesn't tell us really what we want to know. What the public wants to know is to which extent are they exposed to chemicals. If there is smaller quantity of pesticide use, but that this pesticide, the potency of this pesticide is higher, this needs to be recorded and it needs to be illustrated in European statistics. The European Commission must also monitor more closely the risk associated to emergency authorization and must request member states to provide those data. Right now, member states provide data on what is authorized on the market, but in case of emergency, they don't have the duty to report to the European Commission, and this should not be the case. I heard already during the first presentations an argument that is coming quite often on the table, and I would like to debug it a bit. The fact that farmers are facing a depleting toolbox. So I dig a bit into it and try to get some numbers, some facts about it. And actually, if we compare the number of active substance available on the market between 2019 and 2011, what we see is an increase of 9% of active substance available. When we look at emergency authorization, what we see is a steadily increase since 2011. When we look at biocontrol sector, this sector is growing fast. Actually, the number of new applications for plant production products are increasing faster for biocontrol than for conventional chemicals. And the growth rate of the biocontrol sectors is of 23% between the period 2014-2008. So clearly, what the facts showing here is that we are not facing a depleting toolbox, but the contrary. So to conclude, the current SUD directive is actually, if fully implemented, would certainly put the European Union on the right track to achieve its Green Deal target of halving pesticide by 2013. However, to do so, taxpayer money should be allocated to the principle of IPM, meaning good agroecological practices. And that, I'm afraid, I feel is not going to be the case in the future.
Berenice, thank you very much indeed. That's an incredibly rich and forensic analysis of some of the challenges that are being faced in this area. I wonder if I might just come back on a question though for you, whether it's EEB or indeed any of the others, let's say in the NGO or civil society sector. Is there more that organizations like yours can do to support growers directly in terms of IPM or more sustainable practices, and not perhaps just working at the policy level? Just be interested in your perspective on that.
I think in that aspect, I will share Pedro Gallardo's views. Stakeholders, all stakeholders, including NGOs, should be at the center. All process should be totally inclusive, and currently this is not the case. So yes, environmental NGOs definitely have a role to play. They are helping also to disseminate knowledge and to bring some knowledge gap, to roll out some new, or to roll out actually existing measures but that have been forgotten. So they definitely have a role to play in the implementation of integrated pest management practices.
That's great. Thank you, Berenice. Lots to come back on there. We'll move on and perhaps switch to no doubt a slightly different view. We'll go to Laurent Auger next at CropLife Europe. Laurent is, of course, the Regulatory Affairs Director for CropLife Europe. Be interesting to hear from you, Laurent, how you see this this topic and how indeed the crop protection industry is evolving, if it is, to meet the needs that we need for IPM and sustainability in farming. Laurent, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mark, and good afternoon, and thanks to all the organizers for inviting us and allowing us to present some of our views regarding IPM and in general the implementation of the Sustainable Use Directive. So maybe just a few words to start on CropLife Europe. As an association, we are representing manufacturers, so 22 companies producing different crop protection solutions, being conventional pesticide, but also biopesticides, so aka derived from nature, but also plant biotechnology, but now as well digital and precision agricultural solution. I have to make a precision here. We are delivering this type of solutions to any type of production system, being conventional grower or even organic growers. I think I heard earlier that organic growers were not using pesticides, for instance, and that's something maybe we would like to correct. There's clearly several solutions directly being provided to those growers and duly authorized. I think when it comes to IPM as one of the cornerstone of the Sustainable Use Directive, we think that the ongoing revision that has been presented by Andrew and Griffith is a perfect opportunity to at least foster the uptake of new innovative solutions, new tools. For instance, when we think about application technology, everything linked to digital and precision agriculture. Such directive and such focus on IPM is right. Maybe as stated, better implementation and tracking is needed. I think when we look at what happened over the last 10 years, I think the use phase of pesticides or biopesticide has evolved clearly, being technology-wise, but also in terms of types of substances being used, actually used in the field by farmers. We've seen the portfolio available evolve, for instance, with much more biopesticide being available, some conventional products being phased out. And here we can say that some elements introduced by the regulatory system are actually delivering in terms of making the portfolio evolve. Maybe one correction to a little bit to what Berenice just mentioned regarding the number of active substances. I think we can still say there's a depletion of the toolbox, because even if the absolute number of active substances remain the same or increase a little bit over the last 10 years, unfortunately, we've seen that new entries in such lists are not one-to-one replacement for some solutions that have been lost. If we take example of some insecticide covering different pests across different crop, some of the novelty introduced would not be a one-to-one replacement, so not covering everything. So in terms of actual uses being covered or helping farmers to fight a pest or control a pest, we are seeing some depletion here. A good illustration is just the data collected by the minor use coordination facility with all the minor use needs, and we've seen an increase and further demand for some crops being left out without clear solution to control some pests. I think in terms of successes of the SUD, I think it's important also to mention some of them, and I think here's the regular training which has been put in place by the SUD back in 2009 is a major milestone. Now it's becoming a kind of a new normal to have every farmers in Europe trained and then regularly updated. That's also, I think, a very good vehicle to fit in again and update messages around IPM implementation at farm level. And such training should continue to be an essential piece. We also believe that this kind of training is also a good vehicle to introduce also some information on new ways of applying products, new techniques. Here I'm making again the link to some of the new application ways, like linked to digital and precision farming. But maybe as well, we can make a parallel with all the research efforts, especially the EU-driven one, which can also be further disseminated via such training. I have to say, unfortunately, we've seen many of those research projects, which on paper over the last year sounded very promising, looking into IPM and providing some solutions, often might have been a little bit, let's say, disconnected from the reality of a crop grower. And it would be very beneficial, I think, for the next ones being listed, like in the H2020 programs, to be at least very closely associated with end users, in this case, farmers. So at least the outcome can be directly used and the uptake can be facilitated. So a little bit more of connection here would be beneficial. Just to highlight, we of course recognize that regarding IPM, there's absolutely no one-size-fits-all solution. We know, and it has been mentioned, IPM protocols in general would vary from a member state to another, even from a region or to another, and depending on the crop and the growing conditions. However, we believe many guidelines are available, but there's a clear lack of, say, collection and making them visible. I think at local level, many growers would know where to get the information in their local language, but I think there's also a missing piece here, for instance, towards the general public, and maybe here the European level could play a role in centralizing some of this information, just also to make them visible, despite the language barrier. Just to reflect that over the last 10 years, many guidelines and technical approaches were designed and could be available to showcase IPM is implemented. So it's implemented, but as already highlighted, maybe more should be needed, especially in terms of tracking and monitoring. Here, we would believe as an industry that all the digital tools could be of great help in terms of getting more information about what's actually being applied. And the information could be, in an ideal scenario, being fed back at some level. So also making sure all the enforcement aspects can be covered and looked at the EU level, at country level for sure, but maybe also at one day at EU level. So I think there's also great opportunities in terms of looking at IPM with what the technology can maybe help us achieve in the coming years. And that's it for me, Mark.
Laurent, thanks very much indeed. Just in the same way that I asked Berenice if there's more that the civil society NGO sector could do to support farmers directly. If I look in the chat box, there clearly is a question about whether or not the crop protection industry truly is investing in either low-risk alternative active substances or bringing through biopesticides, which some would argue the same thing, others are slightly different. And also what it's doing, given the footprint of the industry, to really push growers or to support growers in transitioning to IPM practices. So, what would you say to that? I mean, are you doing as much as you could?
I think there's a real change that is taking place, and we see companies evolving. For instance, now there's been a clear commitment taken by our industry, all our members, basically, in September last year, about specific investment to be put on the table by 2030. So in terms of investment in digital and precision ag of 10 billion at global level, we are talking, and in terms of biopesticide at 4 billion by 2030. So we see also, yes, an evolution in terms of the type of solutions in the pipelines by many of our members. Of course, we really believe the complementarity of solutions, so being conventional or being biopesticide, remains a critical point. And you just mentioned it, but biopesticide and low-risk active are not the same thing. One can encompass the other, but one low-risk active are just a specific category. But technically, you could be a conventional pesticide and still be a low-risk active. Yeah.
Good. Well, I'm sure we'll come back to that, looking at the chat function. But Laurent, we'll hold it there for now. Thank you very much indeed for that. We will now just move on to the consumer perspective. Not mentioned too much so far during today's discussion, but I have a feeling that Bill Wirtz, Senior Policy Analyst at Consumer Choice Centre, is going to educate us on that. And if not, I'll certainly put some questions to him that might shed some light on this. Bill, over to you.
Absolutely will. I hope I am audible and I can be heard well. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. My name is Bill Woods and I speak on behalf of the Consumer Choice Centre. Just about us, the Consumer Choice Centre is specifically focused on millennials and Gen Z consumers. So we endorse more choice, digital innovation, free trade, lower costs for consumers, innovative medicine, and science-based policymaking. Before I start, I'd summarize our position as the following. The purpose of integrated pest management needs to be to safeguard food safety, food security, and most importantly, through the first two ones, affordable food. I'm myself from Luxembourg, from a family that had a farming background. Up until my father, everyone worked on a farm. And I think if my grandfather could see the innovation that exists today, it is in no way comparable to how it used to be. I realize that this is not the impression you get if you read the papers every day, but I believe we would be remiss to not forget our food is today healthier, safer, and more affordable than ever before. Part of the reason that we have more accessible and safe food is crop protection. This is something we don't actually talk about much, nor has it been mentioned here too much. Crop protection allows us to avoid things like mycotoxin contamination, which affects millions of people around the world each year. Just to give you a number, 40% of liver cancers in Africa can be traced back to mycotoxins, which we know how to avoid with the careful use of fungicides and with adequate storage. I'm a regular visitor in Turkey, and storage is also a big part of this. If you see in the supermarkets how some of the fruits and vegetables are around in the burning sun at 30 degrees Celsius, there needs to be more education about the storage of certain fruits and vegetables and other foods in general. So the concept of crop protection is essential, whether it's in conventional or in organic agriculture. We've had a lot of innovation in the field of agriculture, and we can just take some statistics there. I'll take these ones from the American side, the other side of the pond. Since the 1960s, the use of pesticides per acre has been reduced by 40%. Pesticides persistence has been cut in half, and the amount of active ingredients has been reduced by 95%. With integrated pest management, we can continuously improve the adequate use of pesticides. One economic reality is striking, and I think we need to understand it. Farmers do not want to use more crop protection products than they absolutely have to. Running a farm is something you do out of tradition or out of love for your job, but it's also running a business. And as everyone who's ever run a business can tell you, reducing your running costs, if you can, is never a bad idea. Integrated pest management is in the financial interests of farmers. With innovative tools and new farming equipment such as smart sprayers, especially on big farms, we can reduce the need for certain crop protection products even further. Now you can say, of course, these are things that are only that are expensive and only available to those farms with a large turnover, and that's true. However, as more and more farmers adopt IPM and the incentive then to mass produce certain equipments brings prices down. It's a bit like electric cars. The first ones were very expensive, and if you needed a repair tool, you had a struggle finding it. But as more and more people use it, this equipment gets cheaper and more available, both privately or commercially. Reductions in pesticides shouldn't be just for the sake of reduction. However, when we look at farm to fork, we're now looking at this reduction target of 50%. Why exactly it's 50% is not entirely clear, but it looks good on the press release. That what that means for farmers, what does it mean for consumers? It's not entirely clear because impact assessments are not high on the priority list, it seems. It shouldn't be the goals of IPM shouldn't just be for the Commission to achieve its political targets. When the United States Department of Agriculture did an impact assessment on farm to fork, they found that we'll see a decline in agricultural production by 7 to 12%. The EU's decline in GDP would present 76% of the decline in worldwide GDP, and the situation of food security and food commodity prices would be deteriorating significantly under a worldwide adoption scenario. That would mean if farm to fork were to be implemented globally, we would see significant complications for consumers and farmers. So the Commission did not share the conclusions of USDA. Commissioner Kyriakides says in a written response to an MEP, quote, "The study ignores the effects of the farm to fork strategy on productivity growth, reducing food demand by its ambition to curb food waste and losses, and by a shift towards healthy, balanced, and sustainable diets." I'm sorry, but as an answer, that's not good enough to me. What I also believe is that we need to address the unintended consequences. If we reduce the toolbox available to farmers in terms of pesticides that they can use, they may turn to the illicit market. This is something we don't talk about very often. It's very, very present in developing nations. It's not as present in developed countries, but it's something that we might increase if we restrict the toolbox. And illicit pesticides purchased on the black market, that means considerable health hazards for consumers and also for the farmers using it. And it's something that we need to look at how we can avoid that while reducing the use of crop protection tools. Now, I'm not sure if you checked out the situation of young people recently, but with or without COVID-19, us in the range of 20 to 30 are generally pretty broke. We can't buy our own real estate. Any savings we bring in, any savings that we have bring in no interest, and our purchasing power is fading away. But when asked about agriculture, Commissioner Timmermans tells the Agri Committee in May last year, this is while millions of young people are worried about their existence, that, quote, "We've gotten used to food being too cheap." And I have a problem with that kind of statement. Sure, in my home country, Luxembourg, and in the Netherlands as well, people choose to buy organic at premiums of up to 100% because they can, because they want to, because they mistakenly believe that organic food uses no pesticides, despite the fact that it does. That's the prerogative of each consumer. You have those choices. But we also need to look at what that means economically. In Luxembourg, household spending on food is less than 10% of total expenditure on average. In Romania, it's 25%. Saying that food is too cheap is an ivory tower kind of statement, but also the kind of statement you make if you only shop at your organic store at Schumann metro station in Brussels. But that's not where most consumers live and shop. The title of this event sort of asks us how we can make agriculture more sustainable through integrated pest management. I realize that some organizations and political groups are keen on using the conversation about IPM to disincentivize synthetic pesticides overall, or even phase it out. to go more and more for an organic food model. Here again, the option for conventional and organic food needs to be a choice that farmers make and a choice that consumers get to make. Organic food is not a one-size-fits-all solution, and it actually deserves criticism from a sustainability perspective. So if we talk about sustainability, it is not just talking about the environment, it also means addressing the social sustainability, meaning the effects on consumers. And since I've been allocated just a little bit more time, new breeding technologies provide an amazing opportunity for Europe, and it's something we need to talk about more. It's an unfortunate irony that a European scientist, Emmanuel Charpentier, develops CRISPR-Cas9 gene editing technology, but we largely are not allowed to use this in Europe. Countries like the United States, Canada, and Brazil are far ahead of us in these technologies that allow us to phase out pesticides in the long run if we wish to do so. For that, we need to embrace innovation, and I'm happy that the European Commission last week opened that conversation. And on that point, now I realize that for many in the European Parliament, this will cause significant distress having that conversation, but I think for the sake of consumers, that's a price worth accepting. Thank you for your attention.
Bill, thanks so much. Lots of questions actually coming through in the chat function, but I'm going to just try and build on a couple of them. I mean, first of all, IPM and the principles that sit behind it. Is that something that consumers will pay for, do you think? Or can we find ways for consumers to do that? And then, because you've got the consumer angle in your title, and there is a question here, should the European Union, I suppose in this trade diplomacy, insist that anybody importing produce into the EU, which EU consumers will purchase and consume, should they be held to the same standards as producers in the European Union? I.e., they shouldn't, producers outside of Europe shouldn't be getting an unfair advantage. Perspective on those two questions would be great.
Well, let me start with the last one first. The question on the trade relationship, and we have the same exact conversation on carbon border adjustment. It's always the sustainability conversation on trade. When we talk about this, when Donald Trump implemented certain tariffs on products, he said, well, this is in order to support our national industry. And now we do the exact same thing, but we just have a different perspective. We just say it's used for sustainability. If consumers want to purchase products from abroad, from across other continents, and it's clearly labeled what country it's from, the consumers are free to choose to look these things up. I'm not sure if you, I mean, when you go to any supermarket these days, a lot of consumers use their phones to scan barcodes and actually look up the products that they buy. We shouldn't assume that consumers are unable to make these choices for themselves. And I think when you have a shop that sells products from Argentina, well, you need to realize that these products are produced in Argentina, and we shouldn't request these products to be produced in the exact same way that we do it in Europe. Now, if European consumers get used to a certain standard and they want to see that applied as well, then maybe Argentinian producers will adhere to these principles and will label that accordingly. Every time we have these conversations about labeling, we should label according to what is scientifically based. If EFSA says that certain products can be used safely, well, then we need to accept that, right? I mean, it's the entire question of reduction targets 50%, as I never quite understood this. Like, is the other 50% that we're reducing from, was that unsafe according to the scientific agency that we're relying on? It never quite makes sense to me, because that's why we know that this 50% target is purely political. So I think consumers should be free to choose from other continents. As for IPM, I think, wait, let me just, what was your question again? Just for me to...
So the question is in a similar kind of vein, you know, do consumers, do they understand IPM?
Oh, right. Are they willing,
in the same way
are they willing
organic,
to pay for it?
And will they pay for it?
Yeah, well, certain consumers will, and certain consumers already are. I think if there's an understanding to exactly to what extent that is beneficial for them, then sure. But ultimately, the question is the food that we buy today unsafe already? If the implication of the current use on certain crop protection tools is that they're unhealthy, well, then they should not be allowed, right? EFSA and ECHA, they make assessments, and for what we know right now, they are not unhealthy for consumption. So if consumers want to support their local farmers integrating new systems in order to save on certain crop protection tools, then absolutely, and that's their prerogative. And I think with positive labeling, we're able to do that. A lot of companies and a lot of producers already positively label. I mean, we often have this conversation about labeling being mandatory to say that something is not included or something is included. But there's also positive labeling, and positive labeling means you can put on your packaging whatever you want, and you can say, well, this was produced in a certain way, and it uses new technology. So I think there again, it ought to be up to the producers to exactly how to communicate that to consumers, and for consumers to make free choices in the supermarkets. We're not all the same. You know, young consumers consume very differently from old consumers, and we also, like, we're a continent of immigration. You know, we have a lot of people from all around the world coming to Europe, and they have different preferences, and they want to buy certain products in accordance to the way that they had it at home, and they should have the right to do so.
Well, Bill, thanks very much indeed for that. I don't know if you can see it or if other participants that are watching can see it, but your intervention has provoked a number of questions, too many that I just can't get to in this session. But you might take a look at a couple of those. There's one about affordability of food versus affordability of water and pesticides and water resources and so forth. You might want to take that on bilaterally. But Bill, thank you very much indeed for that. And so it brings us to our last intervention of this afternoon's event. My word, we could spend another hour at least on this. I think it's been absolutely fascinating. But Jennifer Lewis, it falls to you to bring us home, if you like. Jennifer is Executive Director of the International Biocontrol Manufacturers Association. She's worked in several companies in the field of crop protection and integrated pest management, and so probably rightly you have an expertise, I'm sure, that can perhaps bring some of the strands of this afternoon's discussion together. So Jennifer, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mark. And can you hear me okay?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank you. And thank you, Regina, for sharing the slides. So thank you to the European Parliamentary Intergroup on Climate Change, Biodiversity and Sustainable Development, and to Copa Cogeca for this invitation to talk at your event. If we can move on to the next slide, please. So at IBMA, we have about 230 members, 80% of which are SMEs, so small and medium-sized enterprises producing and innovating in biocontrol and bioprotection. So here you can see a slide showing the 4 categories of bioprotection: the macrobials, or which are the invertebrate biocontrol agents, the subject of an agrifish discussion, in fact, in March. These are the beneficial insects, mites and nematodes that control other insects and mites. The microbials, these are microorganisms that outcompete or control other pests and diseases, so things like Bacillus thuringiensis. Natural substances such as botanical extracts or minerals, and semiochemicals, and these are insect pheromones and plant pheromones that affect the behavior of specific plants and insects. If you can press the next slide, it'll come up with a band, and the band shows that the microbials and the natural substances and the semiochemicals are actually regulated as plant protection products in the Pesticide Regulation 1107. And the next slide, please. So IBMA really warmly welcomes the SUD that puts biology first. These 4 categories of bioprotection are part of Integrated Pest Management, or IPM. And the SUD provides really an excellent definition of IPM, and Andrew mentioned that everybody agrees that the definition of IPM as put forward in the SUD puts the various agronomic practices such as crop rotation and many others before the interventions such as bioprotection, and then chemistry is only as a last resort. And the use of bioprotection could actually even be an indicator for the measure of IPM being used, because if you're only getting as far as bioprotection, you're actually working up the hierarchy that we talked about. And the 4 categories of bioprotection are really key enablers to building biodiversity back into agriculture, as they work with and even enhance the existing ecosystems, so creating the so-called nature-based solutions that people keep talking about. So the next slide, please. So bioprotection is little understood, though, politically, and much is regulated under chemical pesticide legislation. And a definition of bioprotection in EU law is actually a key enabler for this transition, because a definition actually could help with CAP eco schemes. Why not pay the farmers for applying bioprotection, an incentive to learn how to use new technologies that work with nature, and so take a couple of years to understand and manage each field, Each farm and each region is slightly different in its biology. And so living systems are working together, and those take time to change. And so an eco-scheme could actually almost provide a type of insurance, the sort of insurance that a non-farming business would usually take out if they were changing an operation in their production line. And farmers need supporting in the same business-focused way. Remember, bioprotection directly contributes to biodiversity. And a good example of that is in Pedro's own country, in the Valencia region in Albufera in Spain, when we have about 16,000 hectares of rice, which switched over time to pheromones, to use pheromones against rice stem borer instead of broad spectrum insecticides. And they increased the breeding pairs of birds, of endangered birds, tenfold by making this switch over a series of years. And that switch was actually helped with CAP funding from the regional Valencian government. So we're there showing how by supporting this change, we're actually able to make a real difference in terms of biodiversity. Also, if we look at what this definition could also do, if you could define bioprotection and put that into legislation, then measurement and targets, by having a definition, we can separate out the chemical PPPs from, the chemical plant protection products from the bioprotection, and so measure the increase in use of alternatives and a potential decline in the use of chemistry. So able to have a positive and a negative understanding of what's actually happening. But the challenge of, I need the next slide. Could you go to the next slide, please? I've just talked about all that, but I'm sure you'll gather that. So if we can move on again, please. Thank you. The challenge of bioprotection is that it is regulated within the Plant Protection Regulation 1107/2009. This is a chemical legislation. It's designed for chemistry. It's not well suited to regulating bioprotection, despite the best efforts of the Commission. And I would just say that one regulation doesn't fit all. May I have the next slide, please? So Farm to Fork is paving the way for alternatives, and IBMA fully supports that approach. However, we see today some huge issues with the implementation of 1107 when applied to bioprotection. And if I can just cite some examples, so where we have renewals of authorizations of bioprotection, they may be on the verge of being refused because the data requirements are not actually fit for trying to assess something biological. Something like Bacillus thuringiensis, which has 50 years of use, was one of the largest microbials worldwide, but it's now, through this sort of inappropriateness, really got a risk of non-renewal and restriction of MRLs. And MRLs would be a precedent to actually set an MRL on a microbial, and they're not considered necessary by many global institutions, including Codex. And then if we look at new active substances, of which bioprotection would be an example, that actually today, if you have a new bioprotection product, and this is information I have from my members, that it will take 2023, 2024 before they get a slot to actually have this evaluated at a member state. And then if we work on current timelines, then probably you won't get that out of the authorization process until 2030. So in fact, if we want to submit a new bioprotection product today, we actually are going to struggle to have it on the market by 2030. And there are many bioprotection products already in the system, and they're also struggling from this timeline. So we have a combination here of a challenge of a regulation that's actually designed for chemistry and not well adapted today for biology. And we have the struggle of the system being quite overloaded. By the next slide, please. Then just to conclude, we really welcome the SUD that puts IPM and biology first. We believe that the 1107/2009 is hampering innovation and reducing bioprotection availability to farmers at no proportional gain in risk mitigation. I think that's an important point to make. The definition of bioprotection is, however, a key enabler to help us move in this transition. I think it can really help in looking at CAP eco schemes and how we can differentiate what we do at national level there in terms of setting targets and measuring uptake, and so showing positive progress, which is very important. Farmers want to, and most consumers and NGOs want to see this positive progress in alternatives. And it could provide a first step to creating a biology-specific regulation. Thanks very much indeed.
Jennifer, thank you very much indeed. I mean, really interesting concluding slide there, particularly in terms of definitions that can help eco schemes that could be enabler. But you know, if I was to pick up on one thing in that presentation, it seems to be perhaps a frustration with the regulatory system in terms of bringing forward a pipeline of bio alternatives, shall we say, to the chemistry inputs. And if I look again in the chat function, a lot of people saying there that they want to see a greater portfolio. What would be your cut through then to solve some of that problem? Because if we went down the track of creating a new regulation, I mean that could take you beyond 2030 as well. By the time that was up and running. So do you have any thoughts on what could cut through?
Yes, indeed. I mean, the Commission is working hard on adapting the existing regulation, and that will come out shortly. And we'll look really positively at what comes out. I don't know yet, so I'm excited about what we will see. However, I think it's important to say that we must develop across the whole network of European countries and European authorities expertise in evaluating biologicals. And today, what we're asking people who have been trained to evaluate chemistry to go and evaluate biologicals. And one doesn't usually ask a chemist to do the job of a biologist. And so fundamentally, we actually need to really support and create a group of experts, and it can be a network of experts across the region, to be able to quickly evaluate these bioprotection products that are in the system. And that's key. I think we can also say, if you look at other types of biology, so the switch from fertilizers to more biostimulants, then their regulation is very different and very biology focused. So are there some learnings that we can take in adapting our existing regulation in plant protection more from what's been done for biostimulants? So those types of things could be quicker fixes than starting from a blank piece of paper and saying we need a new regulation. That's clearly something that's going to take far too long.
Yeah, great. Well, thank you very much indeed, Jennifer, for that and for the input overall. Much appreciated, and a good way, I think, to bring us towards the end of today's event. I hope you'll agree, it's been a fascinating tour through all of the speakers' contributions to this afternoon's discussion. I always look in these occasions to how long participants have stayed with the discussion, and we've had very few drop out this afternoon, which means that all the contributions must have been stimulating and gratefully received. Perhaps we leave with as many questions as we got answers as we began this afternoon's discussion. Clearly a consensus that IPM absolutely does have a role to play in furthering the sustainability of agriculture. Some questions about the extent to which the policy framework is able to support that, whether the rate of innovation is working as it should. We had a perspective on the consumer input to this, just one perspective. Of course, there are many others as well that we could and perhaps should in future events take into account. But nevertheless, a really stimulating afternoon's discussion. It's been my pleasure to moderate that, and on behalf certainly of myself, I'd like to thank all the speakers and contributors that we've heard from today. So that's pretty much it from me. Thank you to all of you for your questions. I got to as many of them as I could. For those that we didn't, perhaps the speakers themselves might want to respond directly to them. So I'll leave it there and hand back to the final word to Regine to close this afternoon's event. Thank you for joining us. See you next time. Regine.
Thank you, Mark, and thank you for moderating the event in such an interesting and stimulating manner. I would also like to take the opportunity to thank our excellent set of speakers for today's event and all the participants joining today's discussion. On behalf of the European Parliament Intergroup on Climate Change, Biodiversity and Sustainable Development, I would also like to thank our hosting MEPs for kindly accepting to take the lead to today's discussion. Unfortunately, due to unforeseen circumstances, our MEPs' agendas did not allow them to stay until the end of this event. But I'm very happy we were able to discuss about further improving farmer sustainability by IPM in such a holistic manner, highlighting the need to ensure a necessary tool for farmers. While I couldn't agree more with what has been discussed today, science-based decision-making is key and innovation is essential. This is indeed a lot of crises we still need to tackle. As we heard, there can be more farming, no farming without crop protection, as has been mentioned by MEP Ms. Müller. And at the same time, sustainability, resilience, and competitiveness are extremely important. So I'm very happy to see that everybody is on board with regard to our ambition. Finally, I would like to thank everyone for joining us today, and it really has been a real pleasure to having this online event with you. So I'm very much looking forward to continue the discussion in the near future. Until then, all the best and stay safe.